Vulcan's workshop echoed with the sound of welding, while Ryan reviewed an armor sketch, ass on a chair and legs on the workbench. Ryan's job as Vulcan's assistant turned out to be more desk work than anything exciting like target practice. She handed him designs for new armor, guns, or vehicles, and then asked him to review and improve on them. As he examined her sketches, the courier realized that Vulcan's genius power was probably weapon creation. All her inventions either had an offensive application or served to support weaponry. The genius could even make cyber warfare programs, like viruses capable of detonating cell phones from afar. While it made Vulcan a devastatingly dangerous genius, you couldn't make a vehicle with just guns. She never patched her armor's joints weakness, simply because her power refused to entertain innovative solutions in theory unrelated to warfare. No wonder Vulcan desperately wanted a genius assistant. She was a missile without a tripod. So, let me get this straight, Vulcan asked, welding a new cannon to her armor's right arm. Underdiver doesn't want you in her life, and Zanbedo suggested you persevere. Pretty much, Ryan replied, scribbling notes on her sketch. He always found genius tech to be an interesting intellectual challenge, which was why he had devoted so many loops to studying it. Oh, and he's also throwing a party Thursday night. Well, Jamie doesn't know shit, the genius snapped back angrily. I fucking hate white knights, and Underdiver doesn't need one. She doesn't need anyone. I'm not sure. Can you even fathom that girl's sheer potential? Vulcan interrupted him. At least a third of the Earth is uninhabitable nowadays, and she can make self-sustaining habitats that can survive deep oceanic pressure. I'm making weapons, but her? She's building the future. I could do without her tech, yes. But the money I send her? It's an investment for mankind. She stopped welding, put her tool and iron mask away, and wiped away the sweat with her hand. White knights, they're smothering, she ranted, grabbing a water bottle and taking a sip. They don't help because they're nice, but because they're needy. They're oppressive. What your girl needs is self-confidence, and she's only going to develop that by building something that is hers alone. So if you really like that Len girl, don't get in her way. If you want to help, don't help. It didn't sound at all like psychological projection. Not at all. I'm sure there's an interesting story behind that opinion, the courier teased her. Wyvern was the worst of the White Knights, casting everyone in her shadow, she replied, as Ryan had guessed. You think she's being a hero because she really believes in justice? It's all ego. Self-righteousness. She wants the cheering children, people looking up to her, without making the hard decisions. If she really wanted to change things, she would have ditched Dynamis long ago. But she didn't. But what did she do to you personally? Ryan asked, a bit confused. Haven't you been listening? She kept me in her shadow. When we started, I was the brain and she was the brawn. I gathered intel and made the plans. She's powerful, but she's a mace. All the force in the world doesn't matter if nobody can wield it in the right direction. The genius continued going into a rant, venting off. Her voice dripped with bitterness and anger, her fingers crushing the now empty plastic bottle. Wyvern became famous because of me, but she was always the one in the field. The hero everyone talked about. And when we made a deal with Dynamis, it got worse. I wanted their resources to build myself a suit, make a name for myself. Become Wyvern's partner, instead of her sidekick. But they kept me in a lab, vetoed all my plans. I can make any weapon, the likes that rival Mechrans, but to the Monada. I was just the girl making their soldiers' armor. Let's make a gun then. A gun, she frowned. A very big gun, Ryan said. A laser gun that can draw a logo on the moon. Why would I draw a logo on the moon? To copyright it? Vulcan raised a finger, remained silent as she considered his sentence in depth, and finally realized that she had no answer to it. I defeated you with logic. Ryan gloated. In response, Vulcan threw her plastic bottle at him, although with a thin smirk at the edge of her lip. She moved towards the courier and grabbed the sketch, reviewing his additions. Interesting idea, though it's useless in the rain, she said, before raising an eyebrow. Why is there a duck drawn in the bottom left corner? I got bored halfway through. She wanted him to review a stealth model of armor, capable of blending into the environment. Invisible Lunch Thief had given Ryan the idea to use optic cameras to record the wearer's surroundings, and then portray them on the surface. You don't enter a fugue state while working, she noted. Curious, curious. Nice work, a voice spoke from behind Ryan. I want one. Why thank you, the courier said, peeking over his shoulder to welcome the newcomer. A genome had entered the room, somehow without opening the only door. It was a tall, lanky figure whose costume reminded Ryan of a scarecrow. A ghoulish, metal skull mask hid the face, and a black hooded cloak the rest of the body. Most importantly, that gentle devil seemed as fond of weapons as the courier, carrying guns on bandolas and a sniper rifle. TCH, not even spooked, the man complained, although Ryan wasn't sure it was a guy at all. The skull mask digitally altered the voice, even if it sounded vaguely male. You're not fun. Mortimer, stop bullying the newbie, said Sparrow, as Pluto's bodyguard entered the room through the door. Instead of her absent mistress, she was followed by Cancel and a new face. Sorry, quick save, he gets off on startling people. Hi Ryan, hi Jasmine. Greta waved a hand at them with an endearing smile. Hi, Greta. Ryan returned the greeting, though he paid more attention to the third person in the group. It was a young woman his physical age, and gorgeous. Not pretty gorgeous, but top model gorgeous. A hazel-eyed blonde whose hair fell down to her hips, with tan skin and a perfectly chiseled face, this Venus could probably bring any man to his knees in adoration. Even her bright white clothes and jewelry were the apex of new Roman fashion, things Ryan would have expected to see on an actress. Unfortunately, from the way she carried herself, her appearance had clearly gone to her head. She moved with such pompous pride and self-confidence, it was almost nauseating. But Ryan didn't care about her beauty. He cared about her resemblance to a certain feline. Unfortunately, she mistook his rapturous attention as something else. I'm Fortuna, the bombshell introduced herself, the courier immediately remembering the name as one of Adam Cat's sisters, the world's luckiest woman. Ryan chuckled. If you have met me, no, you aren't. Oh, really? She moved in front of a metal wall and put her hands on her waist. Shoot me. You're sure? The courier asked for confirmation. Yes. Shoot me. Okay. Ryan immediately rose from his chair, pulled his Desert Eagle out of his coat, and then fired with enthusiasm. The suddenness of the gesture startled Fortuna's teammates, although they made no move to step in. When he ran out of bullets, Ryan didn't bother reloading. Instead, he threw the gun away, pulled another sidearm in his arsenal, and fired away. When he emptied the magazine, the cycle continued with new weapons. AMT Hardballer, Browning High Power, Beretta 92 FS Inox, Gold-plated Beretta 92 FS Inox, CZ-75, Glock 17, 2 Glock 17L, Sistema Colt Modelo 1927, Stekan APS because the Russians made the best guns, followed by a Smith & Wesson Model 629. He's persistent, Mortimer muttered, Ryan almost unable to hear him over the sound of gunfire. That's a lot of weapons, Sparrow noted. Where does he find the space? The only certainty in life is that when death comes for you, you will never have enough guns. Ryan shouted. His gloves fumed with gunpowder. At that point, armored guards entered the workshop, perhaps expecting a shootout. They looked at the scene, Ryan glanced back, and froze time. When time resumed, the guards found their submachine guns missing, the courier wielding both as he opened fire on Fortuna. Vulcan raised a hand at the confused guards, who wisely returned to their post with confusion and sheepish embarrassment. When he ran out of small arms after 10 minutes of non-stop shooting, Ryan moved on to shotguns, bombarding the model with the Remington Model 870. Then he upgraded to his coil gun, and finally threw almost every single knife he had. He only had 2 surprises left. Ryan paused, as his hand didn't find the first of his prized weapons. Hey, where did my A-bomb go? I took it while you were busy shooting, Vulcan said, raising the metal sphere in her hand. I knew it would come down to this. Give it back. Quicksave pleaded like a child, but Vulcan kept the bomb out of arm's reach. Give it back. Impressed yet? Ryan turned to look at Fortuna, who stood completely unharmed while the wall behind her had turned into Swiss cheese. She didn't have a single scratch. Not a single one. And he was only 3 steps away, shooting at point-blank range. God damn it, now Ryan felt like a stormtrooper in Star Wars. That's a Pulp Fiction level of divine providence, the courier admitted. Although, Although, the young woman replied with one of the smuggest grins the courier had ever seen. I have a secret technique, Ryan said, abandoning the use of nuclear weapons to get back to his trusty knife. Which, if I use, will cut your hopes short. I must warn you though. Nobody ever managed to stand up to it. She silently told him to bring it. All right, she asked for it. Zia Weirdo. Time stopped, the workshop turning purple. Ryan quickly glanced at Cancel, as frozen in time as the others. As he suspected, her negation power offered no automatic defense, she had to switch it on and off. Good to know. Ryan memorized that information for later. He took 3 steps towards Fortuna, expecting to slip up through her ridiculous luck, but he didn't. His power trumped her own. The courier briefly wondered where he should hit her, hesitating about giving her a light cut, but that sounded a bit too savage. Instead, as Amerindians scalped their victims as trophies, he swiftly cut her blonde hair to shoulder length with his sharp knife, keeping the rest for himself. Zia Weirdo, hairdresser style. She may be lucky, but in this world of frozen time, the courier ruled without equal. Toki wo tamare, Ryan spoke in Japanese, quickly returning to his original spot in the nick of time, before his power ran out. When the clock turned again, Fortuna let out a ghastly wail of horror and surprise, which startled Ryan by its intensity. Greta didn't flinch, Mortimer glanced down at his teammate's hair with what appeared to be quiet satisfaction, and Vulcan. Vulcan didn't pay attention to the girl. She only had eyes for one handsome courier. You cut my hair. Fortuna protested, her arrogance replaced with shock. You cut my hair. What? Her stylist probably did that every month, and that woman reacted as if she had been stabbed. You asked for it, he replied, putting the cut hair inside his coat. Now, I shall keep your hair as a war trophy. How could you, she replied with noble indignation. Have you no respect? Mademoiselle, I believe in true equality, Ryan declared. Equality of gender, of religion, of race. All shall suffer without discrimination. I have no chivalry, no scruples, no respect for the elderly, and I'm utterly colorblind. Doesn't matter which gods you pray to, none of them will help. Beautiful or ugly, I shall torment without respite. Fortuna didn't share his civilized point of view, but Ryan guessed such was the lot of those ahead of their time. Morty, Greta, Fortuna clenched her teeth, say something. Serves you right, Mortimer rasped, unsympathetic. All the times you mocked poor Mortimer, because he couldn't hit you. Not so smug now. Wait, is this the first time someone managed to wound her? Vulcan asked, curious. I never use my power on my teammates, Greta replied, her expression ever cheerful. Ryan thought that her behavior had gone from endearing to positively creepy. Hey, don't look at me like that, the courier told the crybaby, who kept glaring at him. If anything, I'm the victim. You. Her glare morphed into a confused expression. Yes, I grant you your wish, obey your command without flinching, and I only get ungratefulness in return. Truly, I don't think we'll ever be friends. Fortuna merely stared at him, unable to form a coherent answer. All right, enough with the bullshit. Vulcan clapped to get everyone's attention. Quick save, these are the Killer 7. Our organization's hit squad. I must be bad at math because I only count 4, Ryan deadpanned. We're 6 with the Vamp and Night Terror, Sparrow replied. The former isn't good for direct combat, and the latter's power only works in the dark. Wait, Ryan immediately asked the important question. Why do you call yourself the Killer 7 when you're only 6? We started at 7 when Boss Pluto led us, 1 for each color, Mortimer answered. But since she mostly does admin nowadays, we've rotated between 4 to 6 members depending on turnover. The name stuck though. Killer 7 is catchier than Killer 6, yeah no. Only Mortimer and I remain out of the original lineup, Sparrow explained. We were each a different color. We would need a violet to complete the set, Greta said, grinning at Ryan. Want to join? I veto that proposal, Fortuna said immediately. Me too, Mortimer added with a shrug. He's new meat. But we don't have a violet to complete the rainbow, Cancel complained. Greta, you cannot invite an unproven recruit, Sparrow said, before looking at Ryan. Nothing personal, quick save. Our missions are the most sensitive, so we only welcome genomes with an extensive history of loyalty towards our organization. Maybe in a few years. Don't poach my boys, Vulcan shot down the idea. I'm sorry, but I can't get past the name thing, Ryan pointed out. I mean, if you aren't able to commit to a theme, you should find another one entirely. What, next you're going to tell me Sparrow's supervillain name has nothing to do with her superpower? Sparrow answered with a forced smile. Ryan glanced at her with disbelief. It doesn't. She shoots lasers, Mortimer said. Sort of. I find sparrows adorable, the genome replied, embarrassed. They're my favorite animals, and the name wasn't taken. What's wrong with you people? Ryan complained, disappointed. No respect for tradition and proper branding. I'll give you a brand, you crazy. Fortuna mumbled, still reeling from the humiliation. Enough chit-chat, Vulcan said, growing frustrated with the banter. I gathered you to attack the Metagang today. We will drive them out of Rust Town, even if we have to fight them city block by city block. About time, Mortimer snickered. Ryan may actually fulfill most of his goals in this loop. Could this run finally improve, after the disastrous reunion with Len? What about our armor? Sparrow asked the important question. I've designed variants for each of you. Vulcan glanced at Ryan. With one exception. I'll pass. Frankly, while he understood the appeal of armor, Ryan preferred mobility over defense, since his power made death a non-issue. As for stealthy versions, well, he wouldn't dress in bright colors if he didn't want to be seen. Even one that enhances your power. Ryan squinted his eyes at the genius. You can't. Mekran could enhance powers, she replied, annoyed. That's how he recruited his few living followers. Yes, Mekran. It said something about Vulcan, that she took the comparison to the world's most powerful genius as a challenge. I can make armor which enhances the user's power, though I need to study it in depth. I managed to do so for our fireman division. They took the firebrand knockoff elixirs, which grants pyrokinesis, Sparrow said. You've probably seen one in New Rome. They're very popular. Maybe. He didn't pay attention to extras. How much firepower did they gain? They went from throwing embers to fireballs, Vulcan boasted, putting a finger on her chin. Now imagine what your power could do. This was a trap. Ryan had noticed it the moment Pluto interrogated him at Jamie's place. His power fascinated Vulcan to an unhealthy level, perhaps because she suspected he lied about its particularities. That was only an excuse to lower his guard, so she may gather data. And yet, Ryan had struggled for years to explore his power, and he knew he hadn't tapped into its full potential yet. If he could enhance his power, create multiple save points, or move his current one further back into the past. I will think about it. Ryan thought his life was a role-playing game. Kill them all, a druggie shouted from atop a roof, hitting Ryan's car with a submachine gun, the bullets unable to pierce the shielding. Everywhere, the courier heard the sound of bullets flying. Kill them all. But somewhere along the line, it had turned into a FPS. Hiding behind his car with an earplug in his right ear, Ryan reloaded his pistol while mourning the Plymouth Fury's paint job. At his side, Fortuna fired over her shoulder with a pistol with one hand, and texted on a phone with the other. She didn't even aim, and her bullets always resulted in a headshot. At least she had taken to wearing a white, streamlined armor to protect herself. Seriously, one bad haircut, and suddenly the world wasn't safe anymore? In total, 12 people, Ryan and Fortuna included, hid behind the cover of half a dozen cars and SUVs. Most were henchmen wearing riot gear and carrying powerful firearms, with one exception, a woman in a suit of heavy, red-padded advanced armor whose design reminded Ryan of steampunk comics. That genome had drunk the firebrand knockoff elixir, and as promised by Vulcan, her armor boosted her pyrokinesis. Sometimes, she looked over her cover to throw a car-sized fireball at the enemy. You know texting while fighting is the first cause of bullet accidents. Ryan asked Fortuna, as one of his car's windows exploded, shattered by a 20mm round. I'm texting my brother, she replied dismissively, barely paying attention to the battle. The lucky genome didn't even bother to protect herself, the snipers having a clear line of fire to hit her head. Yet so far, every bullet had narrowly missed her helmet. Felix the Atom Cat. You know that? Fortuna groaned. I'm in the middle of a firefight and he won't answer his big sister. Having reloaded, Ryan froze time for 10 seconds and peeked over his car. Beyond the protective vehicle line, the welcoming committee had taken refuge inside two half-demolished apartment buildings, surrounding the main road leading to the junkyard. Most of the walls had fallen, but the remains provided snipers with enough protection. As for the road itself, the Meta's men had blocked it with a trash barricade, leaving only small openings to allow their machine guns to fire through. The Auguste's firebrand genome had managed to set the road on fire though, forcing the defenders to flee or die in the flames. However, it didn't look like the snipers would run out of ammo anytime soon. Ryan shot two of them, before taking cover as time unfroze. Far in the distance, west of his position, he noticed crimson beams piercing through Rust Town's polluted clouds. Sparrows doing, probably. In total, Vulcan had deployed 300 soldiers to retake Rust Town, divided in groups all across the district. Most of them were non-superhuman paramilitary. Others were genomes having drunk a knock-off elixir. People like Ryan or the Killer 7, with original powers, were a minority in the squad. The private security had watched the squadron move inside Rust Town without reacting, perhaps hoping the Auguste and Meta would slaughter one another. Vulcan then deployed her forces all around the junkyard, where the Meta had established their headquarters. Unfortunately, as soon as Ryan's group approached the area's outskirts, they found themselves welcomed by armed men. "Vulcan here," Ryan heard through his earplug. "How's the situation?" "It's a camper contest here," the courier replied. "It's the bad days of Quake all over again. But my car is all right." "Yes, that's the important thing," Fortuna replied with a sassy tone. "If someone could help us, that would be great. I've got a date tonight." "You will wait," Vulcan replied, although she sounded quite blasé. "Cancel and Sparrow are busy dealing with Gemini and Saren, and I'm fully occupied dealing with cannon fodder. It's such a drag, pursuing them house to house." "No sign of acid rain or Adam?" the courier asked. The Meta's leader was their main target, as Vulcan believed he alone held his group together. If he died, the psychos would splinter and become manageable. "Scared?" Fortuna taunted him, putting her cell phone back into one of her armor's pockets. "Frankly, I could do without acid rain," Ryan replied, being in no hurry to die to her again. "Our powers interfere with one another. She can predict my shifts and counter them." "Then Fortuna will stay with you," Vulcan declared. "Wise choice. No matter how powerful she was, acid rain needed guns, knives, and weapons to kill. And Fortuna's cheat code of a superpower allowed her to neutralize them. And no sign of either yet. Nor of any of the big guns, oddly. Why do I have to stay with that maniac?" Fortuna complained, as their fire genome set a building floor on fire with a well-placed fireball. "Can't you send me with Greta? You will stay with Quicksave because I say so, brat. I'm older than you. Don't waste my patience, Fortuna. Clearing out the outskirts is already more exhausting than I expected, so I'm not in the mood to hear your whining." Clearly, Vulcan didn't think the battle would last for so long. The Meta had a lot more foot soldiers than anticipated. Ryan briefly froze time and glanced over his cover to survey the situation. Much to his horror, a new, scrawny sniper had appeared inside the left building, rejoining two other men with what appeared to be an archaic rocket launcher. Oh, rocket launcher to the left." Ryan shouted a warning as time resumed. How did the Metagang recruit so many mooks? "On it," a voice echoed through the earplug. Mortimer suddenly phased through a wall behind the sniper nest in the left building, taking them by surprise. Mortimer was the only member of his hit squad who went into the field without armor, perhaps because it interfered with his power. From what Ryan had seen, the killer could phase through surfaces, from cinder block walls to the earthly ground. In any case, Mortimer slaughtered the mooks with a submachine gun, then phased through the ground within the blink of an eye. The man with the rocket launcher fell through a destroyed wall, falling on the ground below. 13, Mortimer gloated through the earplug. "I'm leading." "Not for long, Morty." Fortuna fired one bullet. Two snipers fell from the right building's roof. Ryan was about to participate in the kill contest when the reality of the situation hit him like a deer in a headlight. She killed two people with one bullet. She killed two people with one bullet. How did it work? Ryan asked. How did it work? I don't know, Fortuna replied with a shrug, amused by his confusion. The world simply bends to my whims. Ryan stopped time and spent the entire 10 seconds looking at the scene and trying to puzzle it out. Did the bullet bounce back on one sniper's skull and kill the second? When he realized he had no logical explanation, he turned toward Fortuna as time resumed. "Can I cut off your foot?" "What? Why?" "Because if it's anything like a rabbit's, I want some of that sweet luck." "As a matter of fact, go bleep yourself, you crazy, homeless, you crazy homeless." Ryan looked on at her pitiful attempt at improvisation, shaking his head. "You're such a disappointment." Fortuna let out an angry snarl, rose up from behind the car, and unleashed a volley of bullets at the defenders. When she emptied her magazine, the fighting suddenly came to an abrupt halt. Ryan peeked over the car, as did the rest of the Augusti. They only faced corpses with holes in their skull. 18, Fortuna declared, smoke coming out of her gun's barrel. "I win." "I call hacks," Mortimer complained. "You cheat." Their group had probably killed 50 people in total, and lost only one henchman, shot at the beginning of the firefight. Such was the gap between normal human beings and genomes. "Stay here and secure the area until I give new instructions," Vulcan ordered. "I'll be done in a minute." The Augusti spread over the perimeter, but Ryan didn't join them. Instead, he focused on what truly mattered to him. His Plymouth Fury. "My car is all right," Ryan let out a sigh of blissful relief after he reviewed the engine and key parts. The protective alloys had held against the gunfire. "I will have to repair the windows, but none of the vitals have been hit." "The vitals?" Vulcan mused through the intercom. "Does your car have a heart, on top of the brain?" "All cars have a heart, but not everyone can hear it." Poetic. Ryan heard an explosion on Vulcan's side, and then nothing. She must have gone Michael B on her enemies. "All right, all clear on my end." "Cancel, Sparrow." Saren and Gemini retreated. Sparrow replied, ever the professional. "We have control over the main roads. And they're mighty sore losers about it," Mortimer said, his voice turning raspy as he cleared his throat. "Look at the skies." Ryan did so, noticing acidic clouds spread above the junkyard, and extending towards the outskirts. Acid rain. Thankfully for him, the clouds moved to the west, so she was Sparrow and Cancel's problem this time. "They sent weaklings to delay us until they could mount a counter-attack with their heavy hitters," Vulcan guessed. "But I wonder how they recruited so much manpower to draw upon." "I miscalculated." "That's trash mobs for you," Ryan replied. The courier was quite optimistic though. If the metas struggled to mount a defense, it meant the attack took them by surprise. He could always refine the plan in a future loop, make it into a blitzkrieg. "I don't understand Adam's plan," Vulcan muttered. "Now that we have control over the roads, he won't be able to resupply and will call in reinforcements. How does he expect to break the siege?" "He's a camper," Ryan said. "It's not about winning, it's about getting off on our tears of frustration." "Chief, I only see mountains of trash from my rookery," Mortimer said. "It looks like they're shifting though. Do we advance?" Sparrow asked. "We could take them in a pincer attack." Vulcan shot the idea down. "I'll fly by and do some recon first." "Hold the road, there's definitely something fishy going on." Given an official order to laze off, Ryan whistled to himself, waltzing through the battlefield with his gun. Mortimer stood on the left building's roof, watching the road like a hawk, while Fortuna had again begun to text on her phone. The courier checked the dead Mook's weapons, in case he found one badass enough to add to his collection. As he examined the various firearms, Ryan couldn't help but notice the Dynamis logo on quite a few. It made sense since the company was the main weapon manufacturer in the area, but suspicious. As for the archaic rocket launcher, the courier found it oddly familiar. As if someone had pointed it at him not so long ago. A doubt crossed the courier's mind, as he turned the dead sniper's body on his back, to get a good look at his face. His balding, familiar face. "Polly," Ryan said, astonished. "Who?" Fortuna asked, looking away from her cell phone. "A Rust Town mechanic," the courier replied. "But that makes no sense, he hated the metagang." "They must have press-ganged him into their service," the pompous woman replied, her voice softening. "My condolences. You were close. Once, I threatened to throw a plushie at him." Fortuna immediately returned to her texting and did her best to ignore Ryan's existence. What? The Vulcan's voice turned from surprised to panicked. All units, retreat. What? Fortuna asked, putting her cell phone away. But we're winning. Retreat. They have Mecran tech. Ryan heard the sound of an explosion, both in the distance and through the earplug. Then, without warning, the atmosphere turned oppressive. Ryan couldn't quite put a word on it, but he felt no longer welcome in Rust Town. He sensed hundreds, thousands of invisible eyes gazing at him in judgment. The courier's body entered a fight or flight response, his muscles tensing in alarm. He had entered the den of a mighty predator and now had its full attention. The psychic attack seemed to spread among the Augusti, Fortuna dropping her phone and suddenly collapsing to her knees. A cloud of yellow energy flared around her body, an ethereal field surrounding her. An invisible force pushed it back inside the genome, compressing the halo. Immediately afterward, tremors shook the ground, before escalating into a full-blown quake. Ryan struggled to stand on his feet, as some of the henchmen tripped and the road broke up into large rifts. It's the land. Mortimer warned through the intercom. Before he could say more, the building he stood on collapsed due to the earthquake, the hitman phasing through the falling cinder blocks and vanishing amidst a cloud of dust. Ryan had learned about her during the attack's debriefing. That psycho could fuse with an area, melding her body into it and gaining psychic control over a certain territory. Add geokinesis on top of that, and you had a truly deadly combination. But apparently, their intel had miscalculated her power's range. The tremors spread all over Rust Town, collapsing every building in sight in a catastrophic domino effect and blowing dust across the district. Fortuna shouted a warning as the buildings collapsed, debris raining on them. The Augusti ran in all directions, Ryan included, but some of the henchmen were soon buried alive under cinder blocks anyway. What's happening? Fortuna panicked, as the golden cloud around her started getting thinner and thinner, threatening to disappear entirely. Debris that passed through the yellow aura miraculously missed the genome, but those that avoided it hit her armor just fine. I can't get hit. Fortuna panicked, finally getting the memo that her life was in danger. Nothing can hit me. Get into my car. Ryan shouted a warning, rushing to his Plymouth. Above, advanced rockets pierced through the pollution clouds, falling down upon them like a rain of arrows. Ryan counted dozens, if not hundreds of them. While the courier reached his car's hood, Fortuna's field short-circuited and she tripped on debris. Before Ryan could even react, she was buried beneath a rain of stone and dust. She would probably survive with her armor on, but she would need help to escape. Whatever invisible force had taken over the area, it interfered with her luck. Ryan stopped time, and to his immense relief, found that his power hadn't been affected. It must have been a case of yellow interfering with another yellow, instead of something as threatening as Cancel's negation. However, even as he fired bullets at the missiles in an attempt to detonate them before they hit the ground, Ryan could only do so much in 10 seconds. Most of the projectiles landed when time resumed, the courier thrown backward by a massive explosion. Everything went white and silent for a moment, Ryan taking several seconds to regain consciousness. The left half of his body burned, the flesh seared to the bone, and dust seeped inside his mask. We need reinforcements. Sparrow shouted through the intercom, Acid Rain's manic laughter echoing in the background. Vulcan. I'm trying. Vulcan snapped back, her voice almost covered by the noise of gunfire. Ryan. Fortuna. Answer, damn it. Everywhere, Ryan could only see burning craters, corpses, and shattered stones. Clouds of smoke filled Rust Town's polluted skies, turning the area into a vision of hell. The bombardment had savaged the entire war zone. And worse, his car, his beloved car, was a smoking wreck. Not again. What did the meta have against his Plymouth? As far as he could see, Ryan was the only survivor. The Augusti's men had been blasted into burning body parts, even the armored one. Mortimer may have survived if he had phased through the ground, but he didn't answer through the intercom. The courier heard explosions both west and east, the meta launching a counterattack. Vulcan. Ryan called through the intercom but received no answer. Must I call Wyvern for help? He only received a static noise for an answer. Something interfered with their communications. And then, emerging from the ruins and towering over the debris, the source of the attack showed up to finish him off. It was a colossal dark blue machine, 12 meters long and 4 meters wide. 6 metal legs carried its body, while a scorpion-like tail flung at the back, the tip replaced with some kind of laser cannon. Missile launchers covered the Warmeka's back, while 2 flamethrowers and turrets formed the head. Wire tentacles wriggled through small cracks in the shielding. A silver gear with a stylized M at the center was painted at the front. Mechran symbol. The enormous mech was clearly one of his robots, repurposed by the Meta into a weapon platform. From the wire tentacles slipping through the cracks, Ryan guessed that Cyshawk piloted it from within, using his peculiar biology to hijack the machine's command centers. But the robot wasn't scavenged. It looked pristine, and straight out of storage. Little Cesare. Cyshawk's voice came out of the Warmek, startling the courier. What a surprise. I come with a gift box, Ryan deadpanned, struggling against the pain. Where is Ghoul? The psycho replied, wires coming out of a thin crack in the mech's shielding, while its cannon aimed at quick save. What did you do with the body? I gave him to dogs, to play fetch with. Cyshawk responded to the joke by opening fire, the cannon unleashing a massive, crimson beam straight at the courier. Having outlived his car and seeing no point in continuing after such a slaughter, Ryan made a dramatic pose and embraced the light. It was May 8, 2024, the 9th time? Ryan didn't remember and didn't care all that much. He guessed the previous loop hadn't been his perfect run in the end, and there was clearly still room to improve. Vulcan's attack had gone terribly wrong, and now he had to consider what to do about it. He also now knew where Len was, and how to contact her without owing a favor to either the Carnival or the Augusti. A connection he had overlooked, and now seemed so obvious to him. The Meta subverting Rust Town's denizens, and having one of Mechran Warmeks in reserve, was cause for alarm. They also clearly had access to Dynamese-made weapons, and the supply of elixirs implied a connection of some sort between the two organizations. Wait. The Meta that Ryan had captured in the previous loop said robots protected the bunker they wanted to access. Machines powerful enough to fight a gang of psychos. And Mechran was infamous for his robot army. I've got a bad feeling about this, Ryan muttered to himself. The Meta wrecked his car, killed him multiple times, and finally erased the loop when he had finally managed to confront Len. Now was the time for war. Region of Campania, Italy, December 2008. Julie Costa tended to her garden, hastening the growth of its wheat. As a green aura flowed through the plant, it bore purple yields, full of nutrients. She had spent weeks tuning the exact ratio of protein, improving its resistance to cold, and increasing the plant's ability to remove pollutants from soil. Julie's green power activated whenever she touched a living being, allowing her to intuitively understand how their body functioned, down to the genetic level. She could make minor edits to the DNA, breed new species from a single parent. This special plant was only one of many experimental crops growing inside the farm. Wheat capable of thriving in a polluted area, maize absorbing ambient radioactivity. Her personal plot of land was a strange, colorful assembly of unique floral constructs. Although the sun had already set, light shone upon her, making the 30-year-old biologist stop in her tracks. Julie, a man's voice echoed above her, sounding like embers consuming wood. Still working at this hour? Hello, Leonard. Julie raised her head at the man flying 4 meters above her, a human-shaped figure of flames and blinding light. I could say the same for you. Even when he toned down the light his body produced, it was difficult to look at Leo Hargraves. His red elixir had given him the ability to turn into a living sun, transforming his human flesh into solar flames and giving him control over his own gravity. Leonard had once told her that he always suppressed most of his power, lest he incinerate entire cities with his mere presence. Unlike many genomes, the Carnival's leader always used his real name, believing it made him accountable and more trustworthy. It hadn't stopped people from giving him a nickname though, one worthy of his overwhelming power. Leo the Living Sun. Unfortunately, the poor man burned his clothes whenever he transformed. Unlimited power came with downsides. Is your husband here? Leonard asked her. I have news. He's putting Julia to bed, she replied. You're finally moving on. The fiery man nodded with a hint of regret, his presence attracting a few gazes. At this hour, most of the community was still awake, farmers patrolled the walls, tended to the fields, or just played dice outside. The Costa family's farm included a large house, shacks, a barn, farmlands, and several pens for animals. 24 people lived on the property, mostly refugees which Julie and her husband had taken in after the Genome Wars started. Over time, the community had built wooden walls and fortifications around the property, to deter attacks from bandits and marauders. In fact, one such attack was how Julie met Leonard in the first place. His carnival had slain a Genome bandit leader terrorizing the region, then stuck around to make sure the local communities could sustain themselves. Her husband Bruno, a muscled, handsome man with black hair and blue eyes, emerged from the barn, smiling upon seeing Leonard. He had many knives around his belt, for his power allowed him to turn any blade so sharp that it could cut through anything. Wood, steel, diamond, nothing could resist him. When they heard about his power, most people believed Bruno was some kind of badass killer, but they couldn't be farther from the truth. Julie's husband was the sweetest, most wholesome person on earth, and the only living beings he had used his gift on were cattle. It was that kindness that made her fall in love with him in the first place. Julie had moved to Campania in 2002 to investigate the high number of cancers in the region for her PhD thesis. She had interviewed Bruno as part of her research, and what had started as an academic project had transformed into a happy marriage. And then last Easter happened. That wonderbucks. Julie still didn't understand why her family had been selected to receive one. Why did a couple in the middle of nowhere receive elixirs? Why did that alchemist maniac even distribute something so dangerous? Before she knew it, Julie's world had been turned upside down. A madman had devastated Salerno in a power-fueled rampage, a totalitarian genome dictator called Mecron had taken over Central Europe, and all of Italy had been carpet-bombed back to the Stone Age. Since the family farm was located away from population centers, it had been spared from the destruction. Bruno had decided to hole up there, waiting until the dust settled. It never did. "Bruno, Julie, it's been a pleasure," Leonard said, "but unfortunately, the day has come for the carnival to relocate. So it's finally time." Bruno said, clearly saddened. "It has only been 2 months, but to me, you're part of the landscape now. Maybe one day, once peace returns, I will build myself a house nearby." Although she couldn't see his face through the flames, Julie was convinced Leonard was grinning ear to ear. Campania is such a beautiful region. It was. Even the rampant chaos couldn't change that. "So this is goodbye, not farewell," Julie said with optimism. "You're always welcome among us," Bruno said. "Julia will be the saddest. She calls you Uncle Leo now, you know. When will Uncle Leo come?" Julie mimicked her daughter with a chuckle. "Uncle Leo is best uncle." Leonard laughed in response. Stop, you're making me want to stay so much," he said, before sighing. "I promise I will return for her birthday." "I will hold you on to that," Julie replied. Your daughter is the future, in more ways than one," Leo said. "We must fight, so that our children may grow up happy. No matter the burdens they will bear." Yes. The burden of powers. Bruno and Julie had conceived their daughter soon after they each took their elixir. Their little girl hadn't manifested powers yet, but she already showed signs of secondary genome mutations. Resistance to sickness and toxins, hardened organs, accelerated healing. A second-generation genome. Julie suspected it had been the alchemist's goal all along. To foster a new race of superhumans capable of breeding, a species that would soon replace the Homo sapiens, until the old humanity vanished like the Neanderthals. "There is a new organization making waves in Calabria," Leo said. "I thought you should know. Doesn't the Ndrangheta control the area?" Bruno asked. The Calabrian mafia had taken over the region after some of their members received elixirs, overpowering the local authorities. "They did," Leo replied. "They have been wiped out." "Wiped out?" Bruno frowned. "As in? Wiped out? Men, women, and children?" Leo crossed his blazing arms. "The responsible party is apparently an offshoot of the Camorra, but 10 times deadlier. It wants to unite the mafia families under one banner, and if met with resistance, its genomes leave no survivors. It has made it very difficult to track their members, and the communities they subvert won't even speak to outsiders." "Will you fight these people?" Julie asked him, worried. Calabria wasn't very far from Campania. The mighty red genome shook his head. "Pythia wants us to move north and fight Mecron. She has seen him develop orbital weapons in a few years, with catastrophic consequences down the line. And a new psycho in France, Manic plague is a living pandemic whose danger grows exponentially the longer she remains active. As Julie feared, there were simply so many dangerous genomes around. Some of them were existential threats to mankind as a whole, and Leo's carnival couldn't be everywhere. Even now, Mechren, genome warlords, and the remnants of the pre-bombing military fought for control over the wasteland they had created. The Genome Wars, people called it. The fighting was way worse north of Italy, but it didn't mean the south was safe. With the collapse of civilization, mankind had embraced both its worst and better instincts. Marauders, psychos, and bandits roamed the countryside, but Bruno had welcomed many refugees inside the farm, and they had formed a stable community. One that, hopefully, would help the world heal. "We'll be careful," Bruno promised, putting a hand around Julie's waist. "Please do," Leo said, giving them a final nod. "Kiss Julia for me." And so, Leonard Hargraves flew away, moving across the night sky at a fighter jet speed. He never was one for long speeches. Bruno held his wife in his arms. "I'll miss him." "Me too," Julie said. The region felt safe with the carnival nearby. Even while their community and neighborhoods could defend themselves, nobody dared pick a fight with a freaking Sunday, but so many people need his help, far more than we do. Her husband nodded, glancing at the crops. "They're ready." "Yes," she said. "Once I would have said introducing new species into the ecosystem is a terrible idea, but I would rather have purple maize than glowing corn," Bruno chuckled, Julie shaking her head at his lame joke. He kissed her on the lips. "I love you." "I love you too." Times may be hard, but they would beat them. They spent a few minutes making out until someone dared interrupt them. It was Benny, one of the guards. The only farmer taller than Bruno, who never went anywhere without his trusty shotgun. "Sorry, Chief," he apologized. "But I gotta stop you before you move past second base." Bruno laughed, breaking the embrace with his wife. "What is it?" "We have a visitor. A lone traveler, who asks for hospitality." "At this hour?" Julie frowned. It often happened, but few people dared travel at night nowadays. "What kind of traveler?" Bruno asked. "Clearly a genome, all shiny and chrome," Benny replied. "It had to be, to travel alone at night through unsafe roads. He says he comes bearing gifts, and he brings a horse full of supplies. Fuel, weapons, food. It wasn't the first time another community sent a trader to the Costa farm. More often than not, they exchanged food for scavenged tools. Unfortunately, some traders were marauders in disguise, scouting a community for a future attack. Once, the farm let everyone in, but after an incident cost them 3 people, the group had grown far more careful. "We can't let him in," Julie told Bruno. "I'm sorry, but we can offer him food and water, but no roof," Bruno told Benny. "That's the thing, he says he will just give gifts and then leave," Benny replied. "But he wants to talk with you personally, Bruno." "Me?" "Yeah, he has heard of your power and is curious to see it in action. Apparently, he researches superpowers, and he's curious to see if you can really cut anything." That was odd. Julie exchanged a worried glance with her husband, who was clearly suspicious. "How many people are awake?" Bruno asked Benny. "Piero, Donna, Alice, and Luca keep their weapons aimed at his pretty head," the man replied, putting his shotgun's barrel on his shoulder. "I told the others to ready their guns, just in case." "Okay, I will meet him. Hopefully, it's just paranoia talking." Bruno put a hand on Benny's shoulder. "I entrust my wife to you, my friend." "Why yes, sure." Benny instantly tensed, taking this seriously. "Don't joke about this," Julie lightly scolded her husband, but he waved her hand before moving towards the camp's main gates. She looked at Benny, who fidgeted awkwardly. "Sorry, ma'am. I'm not good at casual conversation." "Benny, stop calling me that," Julie said, exasperated. "You've been there for 3 years. I believe we could talk on a first-name basis. And I will still call you ma'am until Julia is old enough to take over." The biochemist shook her head, before returning to her garden. With nukes and plagues having devastated the western coast, Julie hoped to introduce these new species to fight against environmental pollution. According to her projections, it would take only 5 years to purify Italy's air and soil back to their pre-apocalypse level, and tend to undo the degradations caused by humanity's industrial activities. In time, all of Earth would become a garden. "I'll never get used to it," Benny said, as he watched her use her power on the wheat. "I'm not religious, but it makes me wonder if a God does exist." "That wasn't an act of God," Julie replied. She heard booming thunder, briefly wondering if a storm approached. But the skies were clear, cloudless. Odd. Just an experiment from a brilliant, but twisted mind. She couldn't explain it any other way. God wouldn't be so cruel as to create monsters like Mechren and unleash them on the world. And suddenly, lightning hit the farm. A crimson flash of light filled Julie's vision, as if thunder had struck the earth right in front of her. She heard a powerful boom, coming straight from the entrance, while the farm trembled. She turned around, and when her vision returned to normal, there was a burning hole where the farm's main gates once stood. "Bruno!" Julie immediately panicked, rushing towards the entrance before Benny could stop her. The farm's alarm system activated, signaling an attack while smoke spread in all directions. When Julie moved close enough, she was welcomed with a scene of horror. A powerful force had blasted people through the farm's fortifications, with enough force to shatter them. Corpses were dispersed on the ground, utterly savaged. Julie could barely recognize Donna among them, most of her body having been incinerated. Piero had lost his head, Julie only identifying him thanks to his trademark blue shirt, now painted red. And Bruno. Bruno was among them. Both parts of him. A bolt had thrown her husband through the gates, tearing him in half below the waist. Julie let out a wail of horror, as the farm descended into utter chaos. Guards rushed towards the breach with weapons, while non-combatants fled into the house. Crimson lightning surged from the smoke, dividing and bending around corners. The bolt slaughtered everyone in their path, incinerating hearts or detonating skulls, before spreading from one person to the next. Julie watched 8 people she had known for years die in an instant. Another, mightier bolt hit the farm's main house, shattering walls and setting the whole place on fire. "We have to evacuate, ma'am," Benny shouted, grabbing her by the arm. Julie panicked. "Julia is in the barn." An ivory statue emerged from the darkness and the smoke, confidently striding into the property. Its eyes radiated a crimson glow, its gaze blasting anyone it saw with lightning bolts. For a second, Julie thought it was Zeus himself, having descended from the heavens. For this man, this genome held a striking resemblance to the ancient deity. It was a tall, muscled figure pushing near 2 meters in height, with a long beard and a golden laurel crown atop his combed hair. He seemed in his middle age, combining the confidence of old age with the strength of a mature man. The intruder's entire body was an ivory statue. His hair, his flesh, even his eyes were an unnatural shade of white. Only his ancient toga, sandals, and laurel crown were made of normal materials. Perhaps his body had been transformed into an alien alloy, perhaps it was a stasis effect, freezing his body in space and time. Whatever the case, he kept his hands folded behind his back, like a conqueror overseeing his new territory. And then, he noticed Julie. Benny immediately moved in front of her, shielding her with his body while he raised his gun. "Behind me, ma'am." The ivory man appraised the two with an amused look. It reminded Julie of a vulture glancing upon a dying camel, of a killer toying with his victim, before delivering the coup de grace. "Ms. Costa?" he asked, upon noticing Julie. His voice was deep and radiated authority. "Who the hell are you?" Benny snarled angrily. "Jupiter Augustus," the man answered. "You dare call yourself after a god?" Benny shouted, charging at the genome with his shotgun, and opening fire at point-blank range. A volley from his firearm would have torn a normal man apart. Instead, the bullets hit the chest and flattened out on impact. "No. Of course not." The ivory man backhanded Benny with his left hand. The fingers went through Benny's body like an iron sword through paper, his flesh and bones turning as brittle as dirt upon impact. The backhand tore off the skull from the body and sent both flying to the side, killing the farmer in one blow. "I am one." Julie froze in horror at the bloody scene. The biochemist had grown somewhat used to the sight of blood and violence, but she had never seen such casual brutality. That man had murdered her friend with the same care as one swatting a fly. And now, that psychopath stared at her. Lightning manipulation, and some form of super strength. 2 powers at once. A psycho? No. Not a psycho. In spite of his egotistic boasting, Julie saw no hint of madness in that vicious man's eyes. No craving for the blood of other genomes. She only saw sneering arrogance and a cold-blooded disregard for human life. "Kneel," he ordered. Instead, possessed by vengeful anger, Julie rushed at this vile man and slammed her left hand against his cheek. He made no move to stop her, allowing her to activate her power. Although she had never used her power offensively, she would make an exception for this monster. She would cause his DNA to break down, destroy his organs. Make him pay. Nothing. No feedback. That thing ignored her power. It didn't even register him as alive. That was no request, the man said, raising his hand in a karate chop, aiming for her left shoulder. Before Julie knew what hit her, his hand cut through her body like butter, the blow severing her arm and tossing her to her knees. A pain more terrible than anything she had ever experienced raced through her nerves, as a shower of blood flowed out of her veins. She let out a wail of agony, her body growing numb and cold. "Saddening," the monster said, although there was no regret in his voice. "If you had known proper etiquette, I might have let you live. I take no pleasure in killing one of the chosen ones. Especially a young widow." "Why?" Julie asked, struggling against the pain and shock. "Did you want to take the crops for yourself?" "The crops?" Augustus glanced at her garden, an eyebrow raised. "What about them?" He didn't know? "Then why? Why? Answer me," the murderer ordered Julie, without bothering to look at her. In his eyes, she was already dead. They. Julie's thoughts suddenly turned to Julia, sleeping. If she distracted that monster, perhaps she could get away. They can survive in toxic and radioactive environments. They can feed everyone, help us save everyone. You have crops that can feed everyone. He gazed at the garden with sudden interest. "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." If the crops could endure, then. "You have been lied to," Augustus taunted her with a soft voice, his eyes shining with electricity. "The meek will not inherit anything." He blasted the garden with a crimson lightning bolt, setting it ablaze. The wheat, the maize, all the genetically enhanced crops Julie had spent years cultivating, all that work turned to ashes in an instant. After the horror of watching her husband burnt alive, Julie thought she wouldn't scream again. But she did. She shrieked in despair, as the very seed of hope went down in flames. "The future came to me in these elixirs," the ivory man said, lost in his thoughts. "Where the unchosen could not stand the power, I alone wielded it to its fullest potential. Such was the proof of the high esteem that fate had for my family, that we were destined to rule the earth and the new humanity, once this trial had weeded out the unworthy." He finally deigned to look down on Julie, his towering body casting her in his dreadful shadow. "If you ask me," Augustus said with a soft, serene tone, "this planet hasn't been nuked enough." "Why?" Julie asked, pleaded for an answer, struggling against the blood loss and utter despair. What have we done to you?" The ivory man smiled to himself, finding something funny in the question. Yet he answered her request. "There was once a fox that could never be caught, so a king sent after him a dog destined to always catch its prey. Jupiter, seeing the paradox, removed both animals from the world and turned them into constellations." "What are you?" "That is the why," Augustus replied, glancing at her dead husband with satisfaction. "That was me, removing a paradox from the world. An unstoppable force cannot coexist with an immovable object. An invulnerable man couldn't stand a blade capable of cutting anything. This brutal, cruel monster had murdered her husband, a kind man who had never harmed another human because he might one day become a threat. You fear." Julie glared at him. "You fear death so much?" Augustus' eyes flared with prideful anger, and he raised both his hands above Julie's head, clenching them into fists. His face was no longer one of false divine serenity, but hellish, demonic fury. He brought his fists down like a hammer on Julie's skull, and all went dark. Augustus spent the next minutes scouring the farm in search of survivors. The Costa woman's blood dripped from his hands, tainting his ivory skin red. Anyone he found, he slew with lightning bolts. Men and women alike. He had learned this lesson from his days among the Camorra. Leave nobody alive to pursue a vendetta against your own blood. No man, no problems. Besides, he spent enough resources developing a good reputation. No need to let anyone complicate the narrative with troubling tales. The genome didn't particularly take pleasure in this. He was simply protecting his family from future retaliations. Augustus might be invulnerable as far as he knew, but his kin weren't. Even if they had each taken an elixir, they could die. As the Augusti clan's patriarch, the future emperor of Italy saw no point in taking risks. But he didn't regret that massacre either. The very idea of this community filled him with revulsion. Genomes existed to rule over old humanity, not serve it. The apocalypse was a trial for all of mankind, a great cleansing meant to remove the corruption, the laxity, and self-entitlement that had poisoned Europe for so long. To feed everyone would be to coddle humans, to prevent them from rising to the challenge. Genomes had been chosen to rule the new world, like the gods once guided humanity from Mount Olympus. Among the mundanes, only those who proved themselves worthy through skill and service would be elevated. Only the best would receive an elixir and be made. The rest would live to serve and offer tribute. Life should be earned, not given. A pity that woman couldn't see that simple truth. Once he had cleaned the surface of life, Augustus moved to the barns, ignoring the cows and the sheep. The place must have stunk, but the genome hadn't smelled anything since he consumed his 2 elixirs. Neither did he need to breathe, eat, or drink. He felt no taste or tactile sensations, to the point his beloved wife's embrace gave him no pleasure anymore. Even his hair and beard hadn't moved since that day. Such was the burden of invulnerability. It protected the genome even from other elixirs, preventing him from consuming a third. But Augustus could live with it. The heavens had smiled on him enough, and they abhorred greed. Once, the people of Italy had built the greatest, most prosperous empire the earth had ever known, and it was Augustus' destiny to raise them back to glory. Guided by his power, the genome found a hidden trapdoor at the back, tearing it off with his bare hands. As he did so, he noticed a tiny speck of the Costa woman's brain matter stuck to his impermeable skin. Augustus wiped it away dismissively, though it would take a dedicated cleaning to remove the blood. He stepped down a wooden stair, entering an underground basement below the barn. Most of the floor seemed to be bedrooms, to host the vulnerable members of the community away from sight. A smart choice in these troubled times. Augustus ignored the empty rooms, stopping in front of the only occupied one. The place where the last survivor hid. Slowly, the warlord opened the door and entered a small children's bedroom. Since there was no light, Augustus activated a light bulb with a jolt of lightning, casting light upon the room. Its walls were painted blue, and a tiny shape cowered beneath the bedsheet. "I see you, child. I know you aren't sleeping." Augustus could sense electricity in all its forms. Though he could not manipulate weak currents, he could easily detect the presence of living beings. The energy flowing through their nerves gave their presence away. The child, a little girl no older than 3, peeked over her sheet, terrified by the strange man moving inside her bedroom. Her eyes were oceanic blue, her hair brown. Augustus appraised the child, recognizing the facial features from his previous victims. Mercury had warned him that the Costa couple had a daughter, though the warlord hadn't expected her to be so young. "Shush," Augustus said, sitting on the bed. "Did your parents have powers, when they conceived you?" The girl said nothing, too intimidated to make a sound. But as Augustus examined the odd currents flowing through her body, so different from a normal human, he identified her as a genome. A second generation chosen. "If there is even a small chance that you inherited your father's power," Augustus said, kindly stroking her hair, "then I cannot let you live." The girl began to cry, as the genome put his hand around her mouth to silence her. It would be quick. He would simply fry her alive with lightning, or snap her neck. An instant, merciful death. If she survived, she would surely try to do her duty and avenge her parents. Better to kill her now, before she became a problem. And yet, as he looked into these blue eyes, the mobster couldn't help but feel a hint of shame. Such an alien feeling had no place within him, yet he couldn't expunge it. "You remind me of my daughter," Augustus admitted, as tears rained down the child's cheeks. "She has the same eyes as yours." Augustus had no scruples murdering a child, just not his own. And when that girl looked at him, it felt as if he was about to strangle his own blood. Even covering her eyes with his hand didn't ease his mind. Come to think of it, his lieutenant and good friend Mars had told him about a certain problem recently. An issue this child could solve easily enough. Perhaps this was a sign from the heavens. Gods were cruel, but they could also show mercy. I won't kill you. Augustus gently carried the crying whelp up the stairs, his hands still red with her mother's blood. Something better comes to mind. After attacking Ghoul with his car in all his previous restarts, Ryan thought it had grown a little stale. So this time, he hit the psycho with a truck instead. Ryan couldn't find a Japanese one, but the one he borrowed did the job, crashing through the walls and tossing Ghoul against the counter. The courier climbed down from the vehicle, carrying a black cane he had purchased at a shop down the street. Ghoul, there are a few things I can't tolerate. The mass murder? I've seen worse. The child abductions. Now it gets my blood boiling. Trashing my car, thrice. Ryan shook his head. I can't let that slide, Ghoul. Who the? As it turned out, a truck did a lot more damage than a Plymouth Fury. Some of Ghoul's bones had broken upon impact, and he struggled to get back up. Who the hell are you? You see this? Ryan pointed at his hat. This is my normal magician's hat. The happy hat. He tossed it away and showed Ghoul a new, black bowler hat. This is the war hat. Ryan put it on and suddenly looked far more intimidating. You know me, Ghoul. I'm a model of mental stability and composure. I'm well adjusted. But now that I'm wearing my war hat, oh boy, no more Mr. Nice Guy. I will do great and terrible things today. It's going to be terrific. What are you? Ryan hit Ghoul's knee with his cane, causing the broken psycho to fall helplessly on the ground. Bartender, a Moloko plus, the courier ordered the frightened Renisco, before kicking Ghoul while he was down. It's going to sharpen me up for a wild night of mindless property damage. Because this restart was going to be an espresso. Short, but intense. After paying off the private security, Ryan moved to Rust Town and stopped his car in front of Polly's place. Ghoul's head and torso were on the back seat, the courier having tossed the rest in a dumpster. As it turned out, the psycho had great difficulties channeling his ice power without his arms and lower parts. Or maybe it was learned helplessness at work. I have something to confess, Ryan said, looking at his captive in the rear-view mirror. I've been feeling down lately. The stuff with Len really weighed on my mind, and I still have a lot of work ahead to make up with her. I was aimless, with no main quest or distraction, nor any clear path ahead. I had no distraction to fend off the boredom and existential dread. The helpless skeleton looked at him with a mix of abject terror and confusion. But now I'm rested, Ryan said, turning his head to look at the skeleton dead in the eyes. I'm pumped. I'm on top of my game again, and I've got a new main quest. To give your whole gang a wedgie they will never forget. What are you going to do to me? The psycho asked, more and more frightened the longer he listened. We're going on a trip to Happyland, my drug. Ryan grabbed Ghoul's skull, bringing him close to his own face. Happyland. Somebody help. Ghoul shouted, as loud as he could. Somebody save me. But nobody came. Ryan stepped out of the car, wielding his cane, and waltzed into Polly's place. Since it was the loop's first day, the metagang hadn't pressed the shopkeeper into service yet. He raised his eyes at Quick Save, his gaze turning into a glare upon recognizing him. Hey, Polly, my old friend. Ryan announced his unforgettable presence. It's me, Quick Save. You. The shopkeeper raised his archaic rocket launcher at his future client's face. You dare show your face here? Yes, I know we had our differences, but oh boys, Polly, do I have a deal for you. Ryan slammed the ground with the tip of his cane. How much for that face hugger missile? As it turned out, when Polly learned what Ryan had planned, he gave away the rocket launcher for free. It took 30 minutes for the courier to prepare. It wasn't the first time he did a suicide run, so it was a well-oiled routine, but he only tried that kind of stunt when he didn't risk facing a genome capable of permanently killing him. While Sice Hawk was dangerous, the courier was confident he could take the maniac out, or kill himself before being brainjacked. From the intelligence he had gathered over the previous restarts, the meta didn't have anyone else capable of threatening future loops. As far as Ryan knew, the circumstances were right, especially if he could take out Acid Rain early. Since the meta had struggled to organize a counterattack when 300-foot soldiers had invaded their territory, then logically, they shouldn't expect a lone wolf. After all, who would be mad enough to attack them head-on with no backup, And no chance of survival? Don't tell anyone, Ryan said, driving straight for the junkyard with his trench coat closed to hide the surprise underneath. The rocket launcher waited on the seat next to him, alongside 2 submachine guns, and the courier had put the Fisty brothers' gauntlets on his hands. But I'm immortal. Chained to the car hood, Ghoul let out a shriek of horror, as the courier drove through the streets of Rusttown at full speed. Besides avenging the 3 times the meta trashed his car, no score was too small to settle. Ryan thought they simply deserved to be wiped out. They kidnapped children, including orphans under Len's distant care, enslaved civilians, murdered people without provocation, and just made the world a worse place to live in. While neither Dynamis nor the Augusti were perfect, some of their members were good people. The courier couldn't say the same for the meta. It was the last loop that settled it. These psychos were simply too dangerous to be left alone, and Ryan needed to check on that famous bunker for himself. Stealth was a lost cause, from what Shroud had told him, and the meta gang would quickly organize a defense if a large group moved into their territory. A lone wolf suicide attack, fast and unpredictable, seemed more likely to succeed in gathering intelligence. As he approached the junkyard, Ryan briefly raised his mask to consume red pills. They were doses of Rampage, a genius-designed, combat-enhancing drug. It boosted pain tolerance, reaction time, accelerated the production of adrenaline, and hastened the metabolism for 4 hours. It was powerful enough to affect even genomes. Well, afterward the drug made the user vomit for days and increased the risk of strokes, which was why Ryan never took it during normal runs. Thankfully, that wouldn't be a problem for this one. After passing the dilapidated neighborhood without being interrupted, Ryan finally came into view of the junkyard. Stacks of cars, piles of trash, and cranes overshadowed a 3 meters tall fence topped with barbed wires. The metallic items seemed organized into hills of various sizes, with the biggest one at the center. 2 psychos protected the entry point in the fence. One was some kind of humanoid lizard, 2 meters tall, with scales of various colors. The other was a pale woman, whose whole body, from her long hair to her creased face, were as white as milk. Her shadow, however, was that of a monstrous, demonic creature. Ryan identified the woman as Gemini but didn't recognize Lizard Boy. Ghoul. Lizard Boy shouted upon seeing the car approach, his yellow, reptilian eyes widening upon realization. In response, Ryan screamed like a berserker and accelerated. Valhalla. Gemini instantly disappeared in a flash of light, but Lizard Boy wasn't so quick. Ryan ran him over, the body letting out a thump as it went flying against the fence nearby, his body jolting from an electrical current. Ryan drove inside a labyrinth of trash walls, with forking twists and turns. The Rampage drug started taking effect, accelerating his heartbeat, sharpening his senses. He quickly crossed paths with a few psychos scavenging the area, Mongrel among them. The mutant raised his head in shock upon seeing him approach, his teeth sunk inside the carcass of a large rat. Ryan opened the car's window, grabbed a submachine gun, and fired at anyone in his path. The fastest meta members dived to the ground to dodge a hail of gunfire, but Mongrel took a full volley to the face for his trouble, collapsing on his back. I thought life was meaningless, but I was wrong. Ryan shouted to Ghoul. It's your suffering. Causing you pain is my reason to live. As he drove through the labyrinth in search of the bunker's entrance, Ryan heard the sound of bells echo through the junkyard. Someone had sounded the alarm. Immediately afterward, he sensed an invisible pressure weighing on his shoulders. The same effect as during the last loop, before everything went to hell. The feeling of someone judging him. The land. So that settled it? The meta used their new recruit as a sensor, but as Ryan had guessed, it wasn't a perfect spying method. He doubted anyone could oversee an area as vast as Rusttown and pay attention to every single detail. It clicked during the visit to Polly's place. Mosquito ambushed him the last time Ryan went there, but no welcome committee had interrupted the courier today. This implied that since Ghoul was nearby, the sensor didn't pay much mind to the Plymouth Fury. She must have mistaken the situation for a return trip, especially since Bone Daddy had gone on an assassination mission hours before. The trash walls started to tremble and rain debris on the Plymouth Fury, though Ryan dodged them with driving skills honed over countless loops. The courier guessed the land couldn't cause an earthquake inside their HQ, and her geokinesis didn't seem very precise. However, acid clouds had started to appear in the skies. Ryan had expected something like this. Considering her power, acid rain was only effective in an open space, and thus would be assigned to defend the surface. Moving towards the center, Ryan tossed grenades behind him, causing trash piles to fall and condemn the roads behind him. Eventually, after a wild ride, the courier finally reached a 20-meter-tall tower made of rusted cars, debris, and domestic items like washing machines. As he had thought, the base of the landmark had been dug up, revealing a tunnel leading down below the earth. Mosquito and Acid Rain guarded the entrance, the psychotic woman already drawing 2 knives. Instead of paying attention to her, Ryan focused on Mosquito. Having emptied the submachine gun, he tossed it through the window, then drove straight at the insectoid monster. Mosquito looked up, saw death approaching, and extended his wings. But while he may have the appearance of a genuine bloodsucker, he couldn't move faster than a car racing at 240 km per hour. Ryan grabbed the rocket launcher, opened the door, and then jumped out before the collision. Ghoul let out a final scream, as the Plymouth Fury hit Mosquito head-on before he could fly away. Squash! Mosquito perished the way of his kind, stuck to a windshield. The Plymouth Fury finished its course inside the trash tower, sending pieces of Ghoul flying in all directions. Ryan himself had managed to roll over the ground, but the collision with the ground had torn some of his trench coat. A normal human would have had their skin torn off, but for a genome, the wounds were superficial. "I'm sorry," Ryan apologized to his car as he rose back to his feet, the Plymouth Fury buried alongside Mosquito's remains under a pile of debris. "I will make it up to you later. You teasing thief." Acid Rain shrieked, charging at him with astonishing dexterity, knives raised. Toxic raindrops already fell on the ground, eating at Ryan's hat. "I'll tear you apart. Duty. Honor. Courage." Ryan pointed the rocket launcher at her pretty face and pressed the trigger. Semper Fi. A missile with a smiley face painted on it flew straight at Acid Rain, who teleported atop a wall of cars. The rocket switched directions and pursued the psycho. Acid Rain immediately teleported to another trash wall, only for the facehugger missile to chase after her with relentless, implacable ferocity. Ryan rejoiced at the sight. He had had the idea when Polly warned him his facehugger missile could track him down in a previous loop, even if he could stop time. Acid Rain wasn't so different from Quicksave as a fighter, except she moved through space instead of frozen time. The missile would keep tracking her until it either caught the psycho or ran out of fuel, which could take minutes. By then, Ryan would hopefully be in the bunker, the absence of rainfall negating Acid Rain's power. Still, Ryan hurriedly rushed towards the tunnel before the acid rain could turn into a downpour. He tossed the rocket launcher away before bringing out his coil gun and Desert Eagle from under his coat, wielding one in each hand. He descended into the tunnel, fires spreading in the labyrinth behind him. He didn't know how long it would take for the psychos outside to clear the way after he had collapsed some of the trash walls, but he might find himself surrounded anytime soon. He had to keep the initiative and adopt an all-offense strategy. When Ryan had advanced far enough though, the earth walls around him trembled. The land must have figured out his intentions and tried to block the entrance by collapsing it. If she hesitated so long about doing so, it meant a lot of her teammates were inside and risked being trapped as well. "Just what I was looking for," the courier said, "victims." Rushing against the clock, Ryan quickly arrived in front of an opened blast door with Mecron's symbol on it. The thick steel construct probably weighed more than 24 tons, and wouldn't disgrace the Cheyenne Mountain bunker. The meta had clearly forcefully opened it with a laser weapon of some kind, removing the joints and putting the gate next to the entrance. A pack of 4 Dynamese drones protected the area, immediately charging at Ryan with their weapons raised. The genome stopped time and shot each of them with the coil gun, the electromagnetic projectiles piercing through their metal shells. When time resumed, the various machines crumbled into scrap and screws. Ryan loved to challenge himself, but sometimes, it was relaxing to play life on easy mode. The courier rushed past the blast door before the tunnel collapsed behind him, entering a long metal corridor. The second he walked inside, the invisible pressure vanished. For whatever reason, the land's power didn't carry inside the vault. She probably needed dirt or earth to serve as a relay for her sensory abilities. He briefly tested his time stop, just in case a power negation effect covered the bunker, but thankfully his ability worked perfectly. Reinforced glass windows on both sides of the path allowed Ryan to peek inside underground hangars below the junkyard. The one on the left held the mecha which Sicehawk piloted in the previous loop, waiting on top of a platform. Ryan noticed a closed door embedded in the ceiling, perhaps to allow the robot to quickly move the surface. The hangar on his right, meanwhile, housed some kind of sci-fi submarine, halfway submerged inside a large pool probably leading into the sea. Like its brethren, Mecran's symbol was painted on the back. Normal humans whom Ryan assumed were engineers worked on both of the vehicles. So they had already unearthed these mechs prior to the courier's arrival to New Rome. That made his plans for a blitzkrieg much more complicated. The Meta had forcefully opened each gate on the path and didn't bother to close them afterward. The distance also muffled sound from outside, so Ryan simply walked in the room at the end of the corridor without anyone bothering him. He eventually entered some kind of atrium, which the Meta had repurposed into a recreational area. Well lit, the room included an assortment of pastimes, such as a pool table, a bar stand, and even a Street Fighter's arcade game. Considering the number of doors on each side, it seemed to be some kind of hub room. He also noticed an elevator on the other end of the atrium, leading to levels below. A group of psychos, Saren included, were in the room. Hazmat Girl was currently wielding a cue stick, and sending a ball into a hole, much to her fellow mutants' frustration. "Hey, what was the cause of the racket out?" Saren asked as she raised her head from the pool table, trailing off as she didn't recognize Ryan, sighed. "Saren," Ryan raised his guns. "Do you have a boyfriend?" Hazmat Girl looked at him in confusion. "Who are you? Don't break my heart like that." Ryan shot her in the chest with his Desert Eagle, the impact propelling her backward. "I'm a sensitive soul." And then, the courier opened fire on the surprised psychos while laughing like a maniac. For the Meta, the survival horror had only started. 6. Ryan counted 6 future victims in the atrium as he opened fire, Saren included. Some took cover, while others immediately charged at him. All were psychos, and soon, they would be dead. One was a featureless woman made of black ink, with a rather sexy silhouette. Bullets phased through her easily, although the attack's savagery had briefly stunned her. Another was a deathly pale guy without any hair, wearing only black pants, while looking sickly. He had the muscles of an Olympic swimmer. Unlike his fellows, he didn't take cover, instead dodging the bullets with supernatural reflexes. The fourth psycho in the room was a humanoid in a suit without any facial features, not even ears or eyes, and the fifth a humanoid jaguar hybrid. Unlike his kindred, that furry took a few bullets to the chest but survived them. As for the tentacled psycho behind the bar, no, not tentacled. On a closer look, what Ryan mistook for tentacles turned out to be translucent arms of crimson energy. The courier counted dozens of them, lifting a disembodied woman's head with Asian features and long black hair above the ground. Her name was probably Fuckface or something. "Miss Chernobyl, I once told you that no matter what, I wouldn't take you seriously," Ryan said, shooting Saren again before she could recover and blowing more holes in her suit. Due to her overwhelming offensive power, he had to take her out first. "Guess what? I still don't." "Saren, who the hell is this guy?" the ink woman asked, her body turning from black to crimson while she charged at Ryan. It briefly reminded the courier of Bloodstream, much to his displeasure. "Your ex?" "I don't know, all right." Saren protested while crawling on the ground towards the closest door, toxic fumes flowing out of the holes Ryan shot in her suit. The gas ate away at the metal walls of the bunker, rusting them. "I'm leaking. You can turn to ink and change your color." Ryan asked the ink woman. "What's your name, Inky Winky?" "Ink Machine," the woman replied with a hint of wounded pride, turning her hands into axes and attempting to behead the courier with them. "I guess you weren't good enough to call yourself Murder Machine," Ryan taunted her, stopping time for 3 seconds to sidestep out of her way. Considering her power, his bullets wouldn't do anything to her, so he decided to focus on the others first. Surprise wouldn't last forever. "A teleporter," someone screamed as time resumed. "Incognito, go down and call Frank. We'll make that faggot sleep in the dirt." Fuckface opened her mouth and spat a stream of fire at Ryan. The courier dodged, the attack hitting a wall and starting an isolated bonfire. "It's an enclosed space, you stupid whore." Pale guy snarled, grabbing numbered pool balls and tossing them at Ryan with deadly accuracy. The Meta may work together, but clearly, they had no teamwork nor respect for one another. Stopping time for 5 seconds yet again to avoid the projectiles, Ryan took the opportunity to stomp on Saren and then cut off her retreat. Seeing the faceless man in a suit, Incognito, run towards the elevator, The courier shot him from behind with skill honed over countless restarts right as time unfroze. 4 bullets, 2 from the coil gun, hit his skull and chest from behind, the corpse collapsing to the ground. Critical hit. However, the courier ran out of projectiles for his guns, forcing him to toss them aside. Fuckface snarled and flew in his direction, her telekinetic crimson arms lunging for his neck while Inky Winky flanked him. Ryan opened his trench coat, revealing the explosive belt around his chest. And not the kid-friendly kind most madmen used. The adult-only stuff. Nagasaki, he shouted, rushing at the flying head like a bull towards a cow in heat. Fuckface immediately stopped her attack and backed off in fear, leaving her open for attack. Ryan gave her the full fisty facial experience. The gauntlet sent her crash against a wall, the crimson arms popping out of existence along with her consciousness. Just kidding. Ryan taunted her. I have to say the safe word first. But he was having so much fun. It was way too soon to end it with a blast. It's not teleportation, Pale Guy said, throwing more pool balls at Ryan's head with incredible skill. Even with his enhanced sense of timing, the courier needed short bursts of time stop to avoid headshots. Neither did Inky Winky make his life easy, harassing him with her axe hands. He's messing with our perception, paralyzing us. My power can't see him clearly. A blue then, Inky Winky replied, turning her head at the Jaguar man. Rax Hassa, don't just stand there and call reinforcements. The beast man let out a mighty roar, having somewhat recovered from his bullet wounds. As he did so, tiny furry creatures appeared around him in a flash of violet light. They appeared to be cute gremlin monsters, with long hair, sharp teeth, and adorable eyes. Time to commit goblin genocide. Ryan looked under his coat to grab a new gun and shoot them all, but Pale Guy managed to hit his hand with a pool ball, sending the weapon flying into a corner of the room. Inky Winky then attempted to behead the chronokinetic with her axe arm, and while she missed, she sliced some of his hair. To make matters worse, the gremlins charged at Ryan like a pack of rabid rats, and their master kept summoning more. Arg, the psychos had recovered from the surprise and were taking back control of the fight. Since they outnumbered Ryan in an enclosed space with reinforcements on their way, he had to settle this quickly. Desperate times called for desperate measures. You want a furry contest? Ryan asked, drawing out his secret weapon from his trench coat. I know I should say it isn't personal, but guess what? He flipped the plushies on button. It is. And then he tossed the terror amidst his enemies. Ink Girl was the closest, and thus got the first view of the plushie. The plushie looked up at her with its tiny blue eyes, the very picture of innocence. Its body let out violet sparkles, energy suffusing its limbs and fur. Ink Machine didn't understand. And then she exploded, as 2 crimson laser beams disintegrated her torso and blew 2 holes in the wall behind her. The rest of her ink body collapsed into a puddle. I love you, the plushie said with its cute pre-recorded voice, its blue eyes now crimson red. The toy turned toward the gremlins and vaporized them with a look while they rushed at it. The shadow it cast on the walls wasn't that of a rabbit, but of something bigger, and not of this world. I love you so much. Then it ran straight at Jaguar Man at incredible speed, jumping at the surprised psycho. Knives appeared from its tiny paw, and it leaped at the psycho's stomach, tearing a hole inside. Let's go to Disneyland, it said while burying itself inside Rakshas's chest, the jaguar wriggling in terrible pain as the plushie moved through his chest. Ryan heard voices coming from the shadows, voices not from this world. They spoke in hushes, making death threats in an alien tongue he could barely understand. If it had progressed this far, then the effect might start spreading outside the bunker. And it would only get worse with time. What is this? Pale Guy stared at the rabbit making its way into his teammate's stomach. It's not a rabbit. I can see something else inside. Oh my, Pale Guy had some kind of sensory power. No, don't look at it with your ability, Ryan warned him, it's a terrible idea, you can't handle its true form. He didn't listen, and he saw. Pale Guy let out a scream of pure horror, as his mind confronted a truth so horrific, that the psycho's remaining sanity could only break. He immediately grabbed a pool stick and charged at Ryan with murder on his mind. Stop it. I can't, you have to throw a child at it first, Ryan taunted him, barely dodging a strike aiming for the carotid artery. He couldn't find any opening though, as the maddened psycho relentlessly tried to stab him. The younger the better. The plushie would imprint on the first preteen it found as its best friend, but, well, that would solve the problem by causing a new, even more interesting one. The courier stopped time, cut the stick in half with his hand, and stabbed Pale Guy in the left eye with the tip. The killer let out a scream when time resumed, before attempting to engage Ryan in hand-to-hand combat. The courier backed away, more worried by his own creation than the psycho. Once unleashed, there was no putting the genie back in the bottle. Unless he could flip off the switch by surprise, Ryan had no way of controlling that murderous rabbit. The plushie had emerged from Rakshas's corpse drenched in blood, reshaping his intestines into a thick noose. It then leaped on Pale Guy's back before he could react, put the organ garrote around his neck, and then started strangling the psycho. The killer tripped while desperately trying to throw the rabbit off his back, gasping for air. "Let's hug," the plushie said. Its white fur was now tainted red. It looked so happy and peaceful strangling Pale Guy. "I'm your friend." The worst part was, Ryan didn't program it for such violence. It just loved killing. Except for Pale Guy, only Saren was still alive, but she couldn't keep the gas making up her body inside her suit. It looked like someone bleeding to death, except gas instead of blood. Without waiting for reinforcements to arrive or the plushie to turn its deadly attention towards him, Ryan moved towards the elevator, called it, and entered. There was only one other floor available, and down. Pale Guy raised a hand at Ryan, his eyes pleading for mercy while the plushie choked him to death with a blissful expression. "Why?" he managed to rasp, while the courier pushed the down button. "Why? You wrecked my car," Ryan replied, abandoning Pale Guy to a painful death as the elevator's doors closed. The transport system went down multiple floors, making Ryan wonder how far the bunker went, and how large it was. Did it span all of Rust Town? The elevator eventually reached its destination and opened its doors. Ryan walked inside an underground chamber of thick black metal walls. At the center of the room, a projector provided a source of blue light, alongside a holographic bust of Mekran, an old man in his 70s, with wrinkled skin, unkempt hair, and a white beard. One could have mistaken him for a Gandalf or Dumbledore type, if not for the cold intensity in the hologram's gaze. Two blast doors stood on opposing sides of this room, although only one was opened. The debris of broken robots covered the ground. Some looked like black metal humanoids, equipped with laser rifles, while others were bulky, spidery assault drones. Ryan recognized the designs as Mekrans, many of these machines having massacred entire communities during the Genome Wars. In some spots, the courier noticed traces of dried blood and moss. Bodies had been left to bleed out and decompose in some corners, before being moved away. The meta had clearly fought a hard battle for the floor and only bothered to remove the bodies of their own. They probably harvested them for the elixirs within their blood. "Anyone there?" Ryan shouted, but received no answer. Once confident no one would ambush him, he examined the room, finding a map of the complex in front of the projector. As Ryan had worried, the installation was large enough to encompass most of Rust Town, although located so deep below the earth it couldn't be accessed except through the main entrance. The upper floor which he had just left was actually the living quarters and the smallest part of the complex. The rest, far better fortified, was a labyrinth of corridors and rooms with worrying names written in Bosnian. Laboratory A and B Quarantine Area. Nanobot Factory. Robot Production Facility. Army Storage A, B, and C Robot Maintenance Center. Armory. Munitions Depot. Weapon Testing Ground. Matter Replicator. Orbital Communications Center. UB Command Center. Reactor Core. Forbidden Area. It wasn't a survival bunker. It was a weapon production and research facility. One of Mekran's facilities. Even 6 feet under, that megalomaniac had left a mess behind. If so many robots defended the less important areas, then there must have been a whole army in storage below New Rome. An army without a master? A chill went down Ryan's spine, as he finally understood the Metagang's plan. These bastards sent people to their death in an attempt to break past the defenses, all to access the command center. If they took control of Mekran's robots and whatever weapons the genius had left, they would be able to take over New Rome, or at least contest it to the other factions. Hell, the armory alone would give the psychos a tremendous boost in firepower. Dedicated to causing as much destruction as possible in the time he had left, Ryan moved through the only open door. He walked through a tall corridor, noticing a large window to his right. He peeked through, observing what appeared to be an infirmary, albeit the asylum kind. The room had clearly been left to rust for years, the white walls having lost their color, though Ryan noticed crates of medical supplies piled in a corner. 2 people, 1 man and a woman, were strapped to different operating tables. From the spots on their skin, they were bliss addicts. Sicehawk was busy brainjacking the man, his wire tentacle shoved through the druggie's mouth. The woman, meanwhile, seemed sedated, her gaze empty. The psycho raised his head when Ryan stepped inside the infirmary. Little Cesare. If he was afraid or surprised, he didn't show it. How strange too. Omi wa mau shindiru, Ryan cut him off in Japanese. What? Very poor choice of last words. The courier froze time, closed the gap between them in 10 seconds, and then punched him the second the effect ended. Sicehawk's head exploded in a shower of brain matter and other fluids, his wires thrashing around. The one inside the captive slipped away, the tentacles laying on the ground like a squid's corpse. Are you all right? Ryan asked the captive, although he didn't move to remove the bindings, since the run would end in a few hours. The man responded by shaking in place, something wriggling below the skin. The skull shifted in shape, and the eyes turned white. Is this a drug withdrawal thing? The courier asked. Ryan's reflexes saved him, as a wire tentacle erupted from the man's chest and nearly smashed his skull. The courier backed away, as more cables emerged from the body, with the exception of the skull, which underwent a biomechanical metamorphosis. Soon, a monstrous amalgam of wires stood over the drug addict's husk, cold eyes peering at Ryan. I have your father to thank for this. Ryan's eyes widened in shock, as he faced a reborn Sicehawk. When he gave me those wounds during our last encounter and showed me his true power, I wondered. What if I had misunderstood my ability's limits? Could it allow me to transcend mortality itself too? His tentacles lunged at Ryan's head, the courier, using a brief burst of time, stopped to leap towards a corner of the room. I can do more than read minds, Sicehawk ranted while continuing his assault, tossing the operation table at the courier. Ryan lowered himself to dodge the projectile as it hit the wall behind him, trying to make sense out of the situation. I can reshape them, rewire their brains, make them into vessels for something greater. Assume direct control. Every time he died, Sicehawk possessed a thrall whose brain he had tinkered with. The courier remembered the battle at the orphanage, how the psycho had forcefully connected with his hostage, and how the medics noted her abnormal brain waves even after the madman's demise. You tried to do that to a child, Ryan realized, horrified. Which one? The chilling response filled the courier with fury. Ryan froze time and punched the soulless monster's face into a fine paste with fisty without giving him any chance to defend himself. No matter the consequences. Immediately after time resumed, the second captive started undergoing the same ghastly transformation. Ryan spared her the misery with another deadly punch, disgusted. I'm killing you in every single restart now, the genome promised the corpse. As soon as he figured out a way to negate this horrifying ability. It was bloodstream all over again, although thankfully, Sicehawk needed to die first to activate this ability. The similarities with his save point also made Ryan somewhat uneasy, and all the more determined to get rid of the maniac permanently. The courier moved towards the medical crates, breaking them open to peek inside their content. His suspicions were immediately confirmed. Dynamy's knockoff elixirs. Dozens of them. If all the crates contained more, then the number increased to the hundreds. Okay, that settled it. No way a theft of that magnitude wouldn't have made it to the news or caused a retaliatory strike from Dynamys. Adam Cat had guessed correctly, someone within the company supplied the meta with their fix, weapons, and information. Why? To have them weaken the Augusti while maintaining plausible deniability? Make villains for their heroes to arrest? Or were the meta exploring the bunker on behalf of their client, instead of pursuing their own interests? Who was the supplier? Enrique? His father Hector? Or someone Sicehawk had brainwashed with his loathsome ability? Ryan heard heavy steps coming from the corridor and quickly exited the infirmary. Sicehawk and a new meta walked at the end of the hallway, opposite of the entrance. The other psycho was a 3.5 meters tall colossus, a towering monster entirely made of rusted steel. The upper body was larger than the lower half, with the arms slightly longer than the legs. The US flag was painted on his chest. The creature looked more like a humanoid tank than a human being, with even the face was replaced with a mask device that reminded Ryan of a famous Star Wars character. Oh God, Ryan loved Star Wars, even the prequels. He was glad the old world ended before anyone could make cash grab sequels though. They would have sucked. He knew it deep within his bones. It's useless, Cesare. I have hundreds of vessels around. Hawk glanced at the enormous psycho. Frank, kill him please. Yes, Mr. Vice President, he replied with a deep voice, having to lower his head to move inside the passage. Mr. Vice President? Ryan asked. The Vice President of the United fucking States of America, the greatest nation on earth. The giant lunged at Ryan and holy shit he was fast. Ryan would have died without his time stop, Frank's enormous fist stopping within an inch of his face. The courier quickly backflipped away while throwing knives at the giant's eyes. When time resumed, Frank's fist hit the ground with enough force to shake the entire floor, the hand punching through the alloy ground up to the forearm. As for the knives, they went through his eyes. Literally. The psycho's body absorbed the metal knives into itself. After the initial push, humans let me in. They want it, Cesare. Exploiting the narrowness of the corridor, Hawk used his tentacles to hang from the ceiling above Frank, moving like a biomechanical spider. People want to be my slaves. The burden of thought, of individuality, it oppresses them. But I get inside their brain, when I remove the confusion and replace it with my will, they become truly happy. Deep down, you want it too. You are a living birth control advertisement, PSY PSY. Every word he spoke was somehow worse than the last. It took a lot of effort to make Ryan truly hate anyone, but Hawk had won the lottery. I'm going to free you, Cesare, the madman said in response, Frank managing to free his hand from the hole he had made. I'm going to free you from yourself. You know, killing me is only going to be a temporary solution. Ryan shouted, grabbing a grenade under his coat and tossing it at the two. Only therapy can help you with your problems. The grenade exploded right in front of Frank's face, unleashing a powerful blast. And it did absolutely nothing. The giant didn't even flinch, and Hawk had retreated behind his bodyguard for safety. Worse, a crimson aura surrounded Frank's body, and the psycho seemed to grow a few inches taller. Uh-oh. Pearl Harbor. Frank trembled as if having a PTSD episode. It's Pearl Harbor all over again. I'm sorry. Ryan asked. I will never forgive the Japanese, he snarled, raising his fists in fury and hitting the ceiling, causing the hallway to shake. I'll never forgive them. Never ever. Ryan started to understand why they called him Frank the Mad. However, if he could shrug off grenades and absorb metal, then the courier didn't have anything that could take that guy down. Except maybe the A-bomb, but obviously, it would end the run here and now. Ryan had to think of a solution, and fast. The lights started to malfunction, and tiny steps echoed in the hallway. Ryan worryingly peeked over his shoulder. The plushie walked inside the corridor carrying Pale Guy's scalp, its eyes shining maliciously. Advertisement. Do you want to be my friend? The plushie's words echoed in the corridor, while Ryan found himself trapped between two monsters. On one side was a ruthless abomination against nature, and on the other, Frank the Mad Hawk remained in the background, carefully waiting for an opportunity. The plushie and Frank locked gazes, two apex predators recognizing each other. The tension grew palpable, the rabbit throwing Pale Guy's scalp away while Frank adopted a Krav Maga fighting stance. Eldritch whispering voices echoed through the hallway, promising sweet destruction to all living creatures. Behind me, Mr. Vice President, the giant told Hawk, warily gazing at the rabbit. It's an Afghan hare. A tense silence stretched for several, agonizing seconds. No one was brave enough to take the first step. The plushie's ears turned towards the psycho ever so threateningly, while Frank's fingers fidgeted. Ryan held his breath, knowing the following seconds would decide the fate of the entire run. And then it started. The rabbit leaped forward, knife claws extended, while Frank let out a bestial roar and charged. David versus Goliath. Robot versus robot. Man versus rabbit. Of this epic battle, nothing would be said, for Ryan ran away. Realizing he would die if caught in the crossfire, the courier stopped time for 10 seconds. He ran towards Frank, slid on the ground between the giant's leg, and then quickly got back up and fled towards the other end of the hallway. I love you so much, he heard from behind him. And the clock was still stopped. Unfortunately, The moment time resumed, Sicehawk whipped Ryan in the torso with his tentacle arm from the ceiling, having attached himself to it like a spider waiting for his prey. Thanks to the rampage drug, Ryan didn't feel the pain, but he heard one of his ribs break under the strain. The blow propelled him further down the hallway, brightened by flashes of crimson light. The bunker trembled, as Frank frantically hit the ground and walls in a fruitless attempt to catch the rabbit. "It seems you are quite the glass cannon, Cesare," Sicehawk mused, leaping with his wires and attempting to pin the courier to the ground. "You can dodge 1,000 times, but you can only stumble so often." Ryan managed to roll over to dodge the attack, quickly getting back on his feet and running away. Sicehawk pursued him, with the two demons remaining behind to fight. Ryan eventually exited the hallway to enter another underground chamber, with lamps embedded in black panels all over the walls. Blood had recently been spilled on the ground, leaving spots on the metal. 7 vats full of colored liquids, one for each elixir, were lined up on a nearby wall. Linked to strange-looking machines, 3 of the containers held mutated animals. Ryan struggled to see them fully through the liquid but identified some strange hybrid of a lizard and dog the size of a Doberman in the violet tube. The laboratory had 2 other blast doors, one opened, one closed. Sicehawk's tentacles launched themselves at Ryan, who had finally recovered from his cooldown. The courier dodged with a leap to the side after a short 2 seconds time stop, the drug in his system helping him fight off the pain of the broken rib. "That's all you got?" Ryan taunted Sicehawk, as both he and the psycho faced one another. "Guess it's easier with Japanese schoolgirls." "Classy," the wire squid replied, launching one of his tentacles. This time, instead of dodging, Ryan grabbed it with his hands. With the strength boost from the rampage drug, he rotated on himself and tossed Sicehawk against a nearby wall. The psycho managed to recover but quickly turned still. Heavy steps echoed close from the open blast door, something huge moving into the underground lab. My, a playful voice with a thick New York accent interrupted the battle. "What do we have here?" A massive figure, not as tall and massive as Frank but close, stepped through the broken blast door. An obese psycho with the power to turn his skin into an indestructible, black carbon alloy. He was already transformed when he showed up. The man was heavily mutated, his face heavily scarred and possessing prominent teeth like a hippo. He dressed like a man from the 50s, though his clothes had fuming holes in them, probably from lasers. And his brown eyes shone with a mix of fiendish cunning and malignant narcissism. He briefly glanced at Sicehawk, who instantly submitted without a word. "Big Bad Adam," Ryan said dramatically, "we finally meet again in the fat." "Oh my, we've got a new Mark Twain here," the living balloon mocked him back. "Such a razor-sharp wit. You make Oscar Wilde proud, laddie." He was the worst kind of criminal. The one with a sense of humor. "You've been making a mess above, chump," Adam said, keeping his left hand behind his back and his right one exposed. "I've been looking at you through our cams for a while. Sorry not to have welcomed you myself, I was busy doing important work." "Well, fat ass, now that we got to know each other better, perhaps we can discuss your plan to conquer New Rome with a robot army over dinner." Adam chuckled. "You're wired," he mused. "They're always wired when they say that." "Sorry, mate, you'll warrant no exposition from me." "Well, it was worth a shot." Wait, you said we meet again." Adam snapped his fingers. "Your bloodstreams, kid. Cesare something." "Cesare," Sicehawk said, clearly itching to attack Ryan, but wise enough to humor his boss. "Is that the reason for all this fuss?" Big Fat Adam asked the courier, raising an eyebrow while explosions echoed through the hallway nearby. "A score to settle?" "It's old news, mate." "Old news?" "It was an impulse thing, really," Ryan shrugged. "Well, whatever the case, when you invade my home and start killing all my men, I take that real personal, mate. The ride's over, boya." "Oh well, I had fun. I guess I'll just blow myself up then." "Mate, we'll survive your pretty belt." Adam grinned, though his smile never reached his eyes. "You won't." "A fight to the death then." Ryan did some footwork and shadow boxing. "I'm pumped for a few rounds." "There won't be a battle, kiddo. You see, you're mistaken about something. The media call me Big Adam, because they don't want to face what I am, but my real moniker." He smiled, showing 3 rows of sharp teeth behind his lips. "Is Adam the ogre?" He revealed his left hand, and Ryan flinched. Adam held a beaten and bloody teenager no older than 14 within his fingers, probably some Rust Town denizen, clearly of Arab or Turkish descent. The prisoner had tears of terror at the edge of his eyes, pleading Ryan to save him with his gaze. "And though I prefer to eat French," Adam said with a vicious smirk, holding his captive with both hands like a sandwich, "I can settle for a kebab." He opened his mouth and prepared to bite his captive's head off. Time seemed to slow down as Ryan frantically thought of the situation, and it wasn't even his powers doing. It was clearly a trap, a cruel blow to unbalance him mentally. The courier had gone far enough anyway, and trying to rescue the teen would probably fail. He had everything to lose by making the attempt, instead of sacrificing the hostage and making a getaway to explore the bunker further. But there were some lines Ryan couldn't cross, even without consequences. Afterward, it would be a slippery slope. The courier froze time and charged at Adam, punching the ogre's hand with all his might. The fist broke. His own, that is. Fisty and Ryan's bones shattered on impact. When time resumed, the courier didn't even see Adam's fist hit his chest. He just heard the impact, alongside his ribs and spine breaking under the strain. The blow didn't detonate the explosive belt but sent the courier flying against the blue vat. The glass cracked on impact, drops of liquid falling off Ryan's body. The effects of rampage spared him from the pain, but the courier didn't feel his legs anymore. He coughed blood, a warm fluid filling up his lung. "You martyrs are all the same," Adam taunted him, scratching his prisoner's hair with his finger like a pet. "I knew you would do that when you stopped your rampage to save our testers. Sicehawk, pick his brain open before he bites the dust. I want to know who sent the laddie after us." "Shut your eyes, Cesare," Sicehawk said with relish, his tentacles swirling around Ryan's neck and lifting him above ground. "It's easier when you look away." This was the end. Well, it was fun while it lasted, even if the last second sucked. Ryan shouted his safe word. "Jar Jar Binks." The belt let out a beep, before blowing him and Sicehawk up in a fiery blast. And so ended Ryan's vacation. As he returned a few hours earlier, driving towards Renisco's bar, the courier felt like someone commuting to his job the day after a massive bender. He had his fun, but now was time to get serious again. Should he do another Dynamise run, dig deeper into the meta connection? He had the feeling it would come into play, even if he somehow managed to wipe Hannafat Lecter and his goons from the face of New Rome. However, Ryan only saw one way to kill Sicehawk permanently yet, and the option was Augusti exclusive. The courier had already progressed rather far on that path, and he wished to see how this party would unfold. And so Ryan prepared to return to the Augusti path. Until he remembered he would have to visit Len again. To maintain the sequence of events, he would have to say the same things, make the same moves, go through the same heartbreak until it became routine. Every feeling, every special moment, emptied of their substance and uniqueness. An ancient bond turned into a formality. Just like everything else. Ryan parked the car in the first spot he found, his hands on the driving wheel. He stayed there for a few seconds, trying to gather his thoughts. He activated the chronoradio, put some post-apocalyptic blues in the background. "Len," the courier said suddenly. "I know you're listening, shorted. Watching me. You've got to, somehow." He received no answer, no change in the world around him. But Ryan carried on. "You have a table near your sofa, in your undersea apartment. You're currently reading Karl Marx, Hegel, and the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea book you found in Venezia. You kept them all these years because you're a ship geek and that will never change." Ryan glanced through the window, at the sun shining upon the peaceful Mediterranean Sea. He couldn't see anyone peeking over the water. Maybe she was, maybe not. "I know because I was there. Just as I know you give the orphans in Rust Town supplies and money, and that you want to take them to your complex under the sea. Before you believe I've teleported there, or that this is a horror stalker movie, I'll tell you a secret." "My secret?" Ryan inhaled and dropped the bomb. "Len, I can time travel, mentally. Not far, but I can relive the same events over and over again. I drank the violet elixir that fateful day, and it granted me that power. From your point of view, it has only been 4 years, but for me, it's been many lifetimes. I'm probably older than most countries by now. I've forgotten more than you will ever learn. But never once did I forget you." Here he was, getting all mushy and sentimental. It felt so strange, as if the courier unloaded a burden which had weighed on his shoulders for days. Ryan struggled to find his words since they came from the heart. He was never good at this, even before the loop. I know why you don't want to see me. You told me in another history, now erased. Why I hurt you with my mere presence. You hate me for what I did to your father, and how I remind you of the bad days. And I understand. I understand. It still hurt just to remember that conversation, but he understood. I want to help you, Len. Because I care for you. But I don't know how I can help. I never did. Some say I should persevere, others that I should let you pursue your own destiny without interfering. And I don't want to learn the best way, Len. Because it means going through countless trials and errors. We will have the same conversations over and over again, you will forget everything, and every special moment we have will become routine to me. You won't be a friend, you'll be a goal. Still no answer. I don't want to do that to you, Ryan persevered. So if you're listening, and there is any chance we can make up and find a way around that curse of mine, please give me a sign. If not, I will let you be. I will still take action to save the orphans from Adam and his band, but you'll never hear from me again. I'll be gone from your life. Because otherwise, it will hurt too much, for the both of us. He looked back on the driveway. So please, I beg you, Ryan pleaded, please give me a sign. Anything. His forehead hit the driving wheel. Don't leave me alone again. Seconds, minutes stretched, with only the noise from the cars around him. Hearing no response, Ryan sighed, regained his composure, and prepared to run over Ghoul yet again. If the courier waited longer, he might arrive too late to prevent his killing spree. Her voice came out of the chronoradio. Meet me at the orphanage.